Hey guys, welcome into another Valorant guide with your boy Soy. Now, last week's video did better than the last 3 videos before that, almost combined. And you want to know why? It's because you saw less of this. First of all, rude. Second of all, I kind of get it. I would rather look at gaming content than someone's face. Anyway, this week we're going to be talking about the most important element of Valorant itself. Forget aim, forget movement. Game sense is the #1 thing that you need to improve in order to become really good at this game. And game sense is by far the most difficult thing to actually improve. By far. I thought I should just repeat myself because it really is by far the most difficult skill to improve. So this week I'm going to go through 6 different tips and tricks that you can implement in order to improve your game sense. So see you later, face. Let's play some content. All right, first of all, what even is game sense? That's 55-year-old game sense right there. That's more 55-year-old game sense. Well, game sense refers to your ability to read and predict the game's flow, including the positions and the movement of players, so that you can use that information to make more informed decisions about your own play. A really simple example would be that you're standing here on Ascent B site, pushing the site itself. Now it's 1v2 and you're hearing footsteps behind you, so you know that there's at least one person behind you. You also know that the other enemy killed someone on A site. So the odds are, based on the quickest way to get from A to B, that they will either end up here on CT spawn or they'll push market. This is going to affect the way that you play the round compared to having absolutely no idea of where anybody is, what guns they have, what their health is, or any other number of factors that you get from the game itself or from your teammates. Over time, your ability to not have to actually think, but to instinctually know where people are, what their guns are, etc., is going to improve as your game sense will improve with it. Your understanding of strategies will improve, and your understanding of the game itself will improve. All of these things combined are basically your game sense, and unlike almost any other skill in the game, it's not something that you can sit in a deathmatch or the range and just grind in order to improve. But that doesn't mean that you can't improve. You absolutely can, and I'm going to go through a few ways on how to do that right now. Tip #1 is the most essential tip for improving your game sense, and it's this: play regularly. It's really simple. The more you play, the more you consciously and subconsciously learn, the more patterns in playstyle that you pick up on, the more your underlying understanding of the game will develop too. So you should be playing as much as you're comfortable playing, but there is absolutely a threshold if you don't play enough that's going to make it hard or even impossible to improve. 1 or 2 games a week isn't really going to teach you much, but 1 or 2 games a day will absolutely help you improve. On the other side of the spectrum, playing 40 games a day will probably burn you out. It's going to also burn your subconscious out, which is the part of your brain that picks up on these patterns, learns from them, and converts them to muscle memory and game sense. And eventually, it's just going to destroy your love of the game. So for how often to play, it does depend on you, your love of the game, and your general free time. If you only have time for a couple of competitive games, then I recommend playing those games over Swift Play or Unrated, as people won't play those game modes in a way that you're actually going to learn useful skills in. Those game modes are more for learning agents and maps, practicing aim, and just having fun. But go to any Swift Play or Unrated and you will see plenty of high elo players bottom fragging, as most people are there simply to have fun. So to improve game sense, I highly recommend sticking to comp. It's going to give you faster and better understanding of the playstyle of your elo itself, and then eventually ways to master that elo. Speaking of playstyle in the elo that you are currently in, tip #2 is very relevant to that. Now this is less essential than tip #1, but I would say that it's very important in learning strategies and playstyles beyond what you're currently capable of. Watch professional gameplay. This is the fastest way to see what literal professionals would do in any given scenario. A quick caveat to this is that as you play in different elos, the overarching game style will itself change. Silvers don't play like immortals, and your 5-head immortal gameplay might not actually work in a silver lobby because people in those lobbies don't have the game sense to get outplayed by you. The game is simpler and often gets overly complex the higher up you go. But if you watch people that are better than you, you'll at least be learning the markers that they look for and listen to in order to make their decisions. You'll also learn simple attacking and defensive structures and playstyles that you can adapt to your own game. Now, watching people who are objectively better than you is always a great way to improve, as it shows you what is possible and often what you need to work on in order to eventually get to that same level. But keep in mind, this is not passive watching. You're actively watching and thinking about the decisions being made. And also, this often takes longer to sink in than by playing the game yourself. But it's an alternative way to improve your game sense that isn't used by everyone and can give you the edge in competitive play. Tip number 3 is an easy one to implement. Develop your map awareness. Before we get into this tip, are you subscribed? You're not? You don't want fresh, organic, farm-to-table Valorant guides every single week? Okay. If you do, hit subscribe. It's free, it really helps me out, and it's going to give you a notification every single week when I drop a new video. Back to tip number 3. Now, when I say it's easy to implement, this tip really is. So, when you die, look at the map. Note where you were shot from. Tell your team which agent shot you, how much damage you did to them, and maybe if they have like a unique weapon, like an operator or something. What this is going to do is it's going to help you learn all the callouts, all the names for various spots on the map. It's also going to teach you how to communicate useful information to your team faster and get more wins. It's also going to develop better game sense because when a teammate says Sova is yellow with an op, you're not going to be like, what the f is yellow? And then just walk straight into your own death. So it's pretty self-explanatory, all the benefits. So yeah, just look at the map when you die, learn every time you die what the callouts are. Eventually, it's going to be extremely useful information that you will immediately have with you at all times on the map. Tip number 4. Now, this tip is a little bit of work, but improving at anything is work. So this is a skill like any other. Analyze your gameplay. This can be clips, but it's usually better to analyze a full game or at least a few full rounds, not just the bits you did well in because, I mean, you did well in them. You don't really need to improve on that. So I recommend just recording a few rounds or an entire game as you're playing. And once you've finished, watch the rounds back, see how they develop, try and analyze what you should have done in a scenario and why. Because if you can answer the why, then you'll have a much better understanding of the game. Why did I push that angle? Well, it's because XYZ. Now, XYZ is different things that you've picked up throughout the round that have helped your game sense have an impact on what you should be doing. But it's often easier to see those sorts of things looking back at a game. You're not going to always pick it up as you're playing. So analyzing your videos and seeing what you should have done is going to help you do what you should be doing in the game itself. Tip number 5 is to anticipate enemy movements. Now this is further down the list because it's one of those tips where you actually need some base game sense before you can even implement it. If you have no game sense, how are you going to anticipate an enemy? You don't even know what you're going to do, let alone what somebody else is going to do. So once you do have that base game sense, following some of the earlier tips that I've given, then whenever you're in a situation where you're not sure what to think and what to do, think about it from the enemy's perspective. Do they know where you or your teammates are? If they do, what would you do in that situation? How would that affect your strategy for the rest of the round? Now, this is more difficult to do during the game itself and isn't the easiest tip to learn, but if you can learn to think from the enemy's perspective mid-game, you're going to be insanely difficult to play against. You'll basically be playing chess 2 to 4 moves ahead while your enemy still thinks that you're playing checkers. So think about your position, communicate with your team, think about what you would do if you were the enemy, and then try and counter that. And the last tip of the day is a relatively simple one to implement: play different roles. A great way to learn different facets of the game is to play different roles and different agents. This alone is going to give you a great base understanding of the game, as well as a few alternative strategies based on util and role. So I've said it 1,000 times, but learn at least one agent from each class of agents. Not only will you be more useful and not need to insta-lock ever again, but you're going to learn a wider variety of skills and a wider variety of game sense as you develop. So to summarize, guys, game sense is the skill to master of all skills. It's gonna take the longest by far, but 5 out of 10 aim with 10 out of 10 game sense is always gonna be better than 10 out of 10 aim with 5 out of 10 game sense. That's why sometimes when you're watching people at a really high level and you're thinking, how did they even get to that position? Their aim is terrible. Usually it's because their game sense is phenomenal. So anyway, follow these tips and I guarantee that your 5 head will become a 6 head before you know it. Before we finish, I do have a few questions that people left in my last video and I want to answer them on here because it's easier to explain than in text. So the question is this: hey Soy, I'm learning Breach right now and I'm getting killed even after the enemy is stunned. How should I approach the enemy once he is stunned? This is actually a legitimately good question because a lot of the time people use flashes and stuns and then immediately they run around the corner and just get obliterated. What I recommend doing is flashing high, flashing low, or flashing extremely wide, or if you're using concussing as accurately as possible, and then usually waiting a second or so and swinging quite wide, because if you're going to swing really narrowly, the way that people mostly will have their crosshair set up is to hit you about half a meter from a wall. So what you should do is swing a little bit wider before you take your first shot, because when they're stunned, they're only really going to get one shot off every second or so. So make sure they get rid of that first shot, swing a little bit wider and hit them back immediately. They're basically going to be able to do nothing and just watch you shooting at them. Another thing you can do if you're playing Breach is you can concuss and then flash. If you're really not confident or you're not sure that you've got the person, I would use both util just to make sure that you can swing and have a free kill. Another tip to this would also be communicating with your teammates so that maybe you can join up some of your util in order to make sure that the kill is effective. Another question we have is this: I am stuck in gold, I'm taking match MVP every time, but somehow I keep losing. Unfortunately, that's just the way the game is sometimes. Especially when there's a new episode and the ranks get hard reset, you have to play 5 games in order to get your rank back. It's usually dropped down by about 2 full ranks for a lot of people. So if you're normally gold and all of a sudden a new episode starts and you're playing in bronze, it's going to be really difficult because you're going to have legitimate bronze players and you're going to have gold players. If you're consistently match MVPing, then eventually these things work themselves out and you will rank up. But a few things to make sure that you're doing is make sure your communication is right, because if you're not communicating, you're not telling your team what is happening and what you're doing, but you're running around getting kills, that doesn't always actually help them because they're going to get picked off while you're running around picking off other people. So great communication is key here. Another potential thing that you can do is jump into a duo or a trio. If you're in gold, you can still use trios. So I would maybe get 1 or 2 friends that you trust or that you play with consistently and just keep playing with them. As long as you know that you have at least 1 person on your team that you can rely on, generally 2 people doing really well is going to be enough to carry a lot of teams at that elo. Anyway guys, thank you so much for the questions. I hope my answers made sense. If you do have any other further questions that you want me to answer, drop them in the chat. I will either answer them in the chat itself, or if I think they deserve a little bit more explanation, I'll add them to my video like I did this week. Anyway, thank you so much again for watching. Hit subscribe, like my video, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you next week. Peace out from your boy Soy.